Real YouTubists have viewers. Thank you for viewing this YouTube video. I feel like I'm getting faster at drawing the intro. Anyway, the intro. The intro, Wolf. It's called never mind. Anyway, hello. It's your boy. Man, full screen, but you weren't expecting full screen Wolf today. This is exciting. We don't normally do full screen. Anyway, so today I decided to do a video on a fun topic that I'm personally interested in. And it's talking about whether Dynamax or ZMoves are better for the game. And I think I probably will title this in a way that makes it obvious what my opinion is. I will say, though, I don't know when this is being posted because I'm currently ahead on videos. Can we get a congratulations, Wolf? Or we're proud of you, Wolf, for being ahead on videos, so you're not recording the day that you're uploading. Thank you very much, everyone in the comments who has said this to me. But anyway, so I don't know when this is going to be published, but this is the first video I'm recording since I hit 200,000 subscribers, so I do just want to say thank you. This is kind of incredible to me. We were at 60,000-ish, 63,000 in November, October. So in less than a year, we've over tripled our subscriber base, so welcome to all the new viewers, and yeah, thank you guys so much. It's been kind of ridiculous in like the best way, but yeah, I could never have imagined being at 200,000 subscribers. Like, I can't even conceptualize that number, truthfully, but I'm really proud, I'm really happy, and yeah, I'm excited to keep, trying to push the channel forward and seeing where we go. So anyway, with that being said, let's talk about the topic that none of you asked for, but I'm talking about anyway, which is Dynamax Generation 8's signature mechanic versus ZMoves, Generation 7's signature mechanic. Now, as of Generation 6, each generation introduced a mechanic. And by a mechanic, I mean a specific, overpowered, centralizing mechanic that defined how games would be played for the next 3 years of competitive play in these games. So, in Generation 6, we had Mega Evolution, which I could talk about as well, but I wanted to not be overzealous and just talk about two things right now. But Mega Evolution introduced in Generation 6. Generation 7 introduced Z-Moves. Funnily enough, not the generation with Pokemon X and Y. So just Pokemon Z never released Z-Moves save for Generation 7, which is Pokemon Sun and Pokemon Moon. And then Generation 8 introduced Dynamax. And you could maybe argue that Generation 5 introduced Gems, but I don't think those were like as meta-defining as Z-Moves and Megas and Dynamax, so I'm not including them in my analysis here. So, yeah, this is going to be a little unstructured, but I do have notes, so, I mean, you guys know me. So, anyway, let's talk about it. So, I'm just going to say it. I think Dynamax is a much healthier, much better mechanic than Z-Moves. There's a number of reasons for that. The first, I'm looking over here because that's where my notes are. Let's go, Wolf. The first is that, like, it kind of seems counterintuitive, right? Because on the surface, what you might think is that Dynamax gives you access to something very similar to Z-Moves. But instead of for one turn and only once per battle, you have it for 3 turns, which is kind of a huge deal. And I'm going to address that in a second. The other thing is that Dynamax powers up your move significantly, oftentimes at least a 1.5 times boost, but it also has a secondary effect, whereas with Z-Moves, the secondary effects were only for moves that didn't do damage. So you could run like Z-Snatch, which would raise your speed. However, if you use Z-Fighting, like all-out pummeling, for example, there was no secondary effect. Whereas if you use Max Knuckle, the Dynamax version of the fighting move, it would actually turn into Max Knuckle and also give you an attack boost. So it might seem counterintuitive that I like Dynamax more than Z-Moves, but there's a reason for it. The first is that you can Dynamax defensively, whereas you typically did not use Z-Moves defensively. There were some exceptions. Some Z-Moves, for example, status Z-Moves, like Z-Psych Up, for example, would restore your health, as would Z-Haze, and there were a couple other Z-Moves that, were run defensively. However, for the most part, Z-Moves were used almost exclusively offensively. And the difference in power is something that we have to talk about. Even though both Z-Moves and Dynamax power up your attacks, they don't do so at the same rate. So while a Z-Move powers up while Dynamax does, turn most moves to a 130 base power move, weaker moves stay sometimes around 110. I think some only go to 90, and then at maximum, I believe it caps at 150 base power, which, is still significant, but those are only for moves like Blast Burn and Frenzy Plant and such. So most Dynamax attacks turn to a 130 to 150 base power move. However, the difference with Z-Moves is that instead of turning to like 130 to 150, which, is it's basically the equivalent of running a choice specs, like choice specs or choice band on most Pokemon. Like Moonblast turns into like 90 turns into 130, 95 turns into 130. So anything, like, it's slightly stronger than a choice specs if it's like an 80 base power move, and slightly weaker if it's like a 90 base power move, if I can do math in my head. Yeah. So it basically gives you a choice specs for 3 turns in terms of damage output. However, with Z moves, even though you only got to attack once, the power was normally between 170 and 200. Moves like Water Spout and Eruption turned into 200 base power moves, whereas moves like Sacred Sword, which aren't, that powerful of a move, turns into 175 base power. So 175 to 200 was the general range, and that is a significant increase over 130 to 150. So rather than a move being something like a choice specs, it's basically the same as applying super effective damage to a move, and sometimes even more than that, because a lot of these moves were over doubled in terms of their damage output, which is very significant. Doubling a move's damage output is very, very dangerous, especially in a metagame with Pokemon like Kartana. Kartana was one of my least favorite Z users to go against because it could use Z Fighting or Z Grass. Z Fighting would allow it to knock out other Kartana. It could knock out Incineroar. It was a really dangerous Pokemon, and then with Beast Boost, it would then it would snowball that damage into an attack. So Z move's power increase is significant enough, and even though, like, you might think they're both powering up the Pokemon, like, because they don't do it the same amount, it plays very differently. Now let's talk about how the fact that Dynamax lasts for 3 turns, whereas Z moves are only used once per game. I hope you guys don't mind. Actually, my hair is bugging me. I'm gonna put some stuff in it while I talk. So we're doing it live. So Z moves are only once per game, whereas Dynamax lasts for 3 turns. That might seem like, I've been talking about damage increase, and you might think that, like, oh, doesn't that counter the point where you just made, where it's about, like, sure, you're hitting with a weaker move, but you get 3 weaker moves that are powered up rather than 1 stronger move, so aren't you doing more damage with a weaker move? The thing about this is that I think Dynamax's increase in power is offset somewhat by the fact that that Dynamax doubles your HP. So Dynamax can be used defensively, like I was talking about earlier. I didn't fully expand on that point. Dynamax can be used defensively, whereas Z moves were not typically used defensively, I should say. And what I mean by defensively is, I mean, multiplying a move by 1.5 times the damage is nice, right? No one's knocking that. However, when you double your HP, you actually are doing less relative damage. So a move powered up by 1.5 times to a doubled HP Pokemon will do less damage than just if Dynamax was not involved at all. And so you can use your Dynamax to weather the opponent's Dynamax by sponging up damage. And of course they could attack the partner, sure, but then they're also ignoring your Dynamax Pokemon, which is probably doing things that are problematic to them. So, yeah, I think because of the HP doubling nature of Dynamax, it's actually, like, pretty interesting and, like, very viable to use it defensively, because you get 3 turns, but, when you factor in Protect and Max Guard and all these other kind of counterplays, I think it's a lot easier to stall out Dynamax than, maybe not to stall out a Z move, because all you have to do is call it Protect correctly. However, it's not like, the damage output is not as terrifying as it seems, because you have access to your own Dynamax, and even if you don't use your Dynamax to counter their Dynamax, you can also save it, right? And you can wait until after their Dynamax is over, and so even though you might lose in the short term, it gives you an advantage in the long term. So I think there's more strategic play for it. Something else I want to talk about is that although both Dynamax and Z moves will do 1/4 of their original intended damage through Protect, which I'm personally not crazy about. I understand why that mechanic is in the game, though I don't love it personally. Although I haven't really thought about it as much maybe as I should have. But the thing is that with Z moves, a lot of the times it felt like it forced kind of this guessing game, right? Where in a lot of situations, if you wanted to hit an opponent with a Z move, you would have to call whether or not they would Protect, and you'd have to time your Z move correctly. And I didn't like that so much damage output was reliant on making one correct play. Dynamax, the 3-turn effect of Dynamax actually mitigates this a bit, because you can't protect against, it's basically impossible to fully stall out a Dynamax Pokemon without taking any damage, or like without taking significant, taking at least one full powered attack, let's say, with the exception of knocking out the Pokemon. But if you want to play defensively, you'd have to like Protect and then switch to an immunity and then Protect, which can definitely happen, like I've done it, but it's not common. But it also means that there's less reliance on individual turns and more reliance on a macro scale, which I personally like, because you can be a great player, but if you like, at the end of the day, if something is a 50-50, which I don't, okay, spoilers, I don't really love that turn in Pokemon because I think people use it a lot incorrectly, but if we're just talking about when you're going to use your Z move and when your opponent's going to protect, having a level of mind game, which is kind of like, you know, which is a mind game, and it's a mind game about a central piece of damage in the match, I wasn't crazy about that. I was not crazy about that. I actually have to talk about, I'm making a note for myself so I can talk about this later. Okay, next up, let's talk about how there were status Z moves, some of which were actually very problematic and some of which I abused. Let's go. So Z moves could be used on any attack. You could, not every attack was good to use a Z move on, to be clear, but you could, in theory, use a Z move on any attack. Some of those attacks did not do damage, and instead of turning into max guard, like what happened to Dynamax, they would turn into Z versions of their attacks. So, for example, Z Tailwind would raise your crit rate, I think by 2 stages, but now I'm pretty sure by 2 stages. Yeah, Z Tailwind would raise your crit rate, Z Psych Up, like I mentioned, would heal you, Z Haze would heal you, but there were some problematic ones. So, one of the biggest ones was Z Destiny Bond was used in 2017 by yours truly, as among others. Z Destiny Bond would redirect all attacks to the Z Destiny Bond user, so it would serve as both Destiny Bond and Follow Me for the turn, albeit it would not have priority, and that made certain strategies like Z Destiny Bond plus Belly Drum Snorlax with Mimikyu Snorlax very, very dangerous. I used that, by the way. That's what I used at Worlds 2017 to top cut, and it was great, but it was not super interactive in my opinion, and yeah, it was like, with that lead in particular, it felt really much like if the opponent led wrong, they would just lose. And I didn't think that was like super great. There were a couple other really dangerous status Z moves as well. Z Snatch could be used, although it didn't get a ton of usage. Z Psych Up and Z Haze could both be problematic. Overall, I don't think Z status, like Z moves, were actually like that horrible for the game or anything. Like I don't think they were bad, but they just added more volatility and more room for creativity. To be fair, you can't use, apart from using stuff like Copycat and Max Guard, you can't really abuse your status moves when you're in Dynamax form. They all turn into Max Guard, and of course there's some clever things you could do, like not running Protect, but having like Dragon Dance in your Dragapult and then gaining Max Guard when you Dynamax. So there are some things you can do with that. However, make another note. Yeah, however, like I guess that's kind of a neutral point. Like on the one hand, you had more room for creativity. On the other hand, some of them were really broken. The other one I want to talk about is Deconversion. Didn't get a ton of usage, but was used a little bit in 2017. Marcus used it to get top 8 at US Nationals, and it was a very dangerous strategy. Omni boosting Z moves in general were kind of stupid in my opinion. Z Conversion would increase all of your stats by 1. It was a +1 in every stat, and it would also turn Porygon's type into electric, and so with adaptability and a +1 special attack and electric stab, Porygon Z would do like insane amounts of damage. It was actually ridiculous. So, yeah, it was really kind of stupid, and yeah, it also made some Pokemon like. Oh, wait, I totally forgot. In 2019, people, myself included, would run Z Hypnosis Bronzong to increase, or Z Trick Room Bronzong, excuse me, to increase accuracy. So you'd Z Trick Room, and then you could Hypnosis with 83% accuracy. So there was just, like, some things that, I don't know. You could argue they were good, you could argue they were bad. A lot of the things I've described were kind of degenerate, in my opinion. However, I could understand why people would like them as well. Yeah, so there were status Z moves, which were, kind of just volatile, I would describe them as. Then we had broken Z moves. So there's only 2 that came to mind. I'm sure I missed some. However, yeah, there were a couple really broken ones. The first that I want to talk about is Extreme Evo Boost. Extreme Evo Boost is Eevee's signature Z move, and it would give it +2 in every stat. So there were some teams that were built around Eevee, and just like Eevee Clefairy, for example, in 2017, where Eevee would go for this setup move and then try to baton pass or be psych-upped. And then go into a sweeper like Espeon or Tapu Fini or Crocodile, for example. And although I liked the strategy at the time and I thought it was funny, it was something that like you had to respect. It actually won a regional, and it was honestly, I'm just gonna say it was degenerate. Like it was 100% degenerate, and I don't think it was good for the game. It forced people to do stupid stuff like have Haze just to counter it, because it was, if you didn't have a team for it, like it could just be an auto-loss matchup, and I think the effect was too overpowered, even though Eevee was not that good of a Pokemon. I'm sorry, Gio. Even though Eevee was not that good of a Pokemon, the effect was so good that it just, like, it was another thing you had to account for in team building, and I don't think it was, like, super healthy for the game. Then we have Komao, personal least favorite Pokemon of mine, though I did intend to bring it to the 2018 World Championships day 2, but I got knocked out day 1 with a different team, so maybe it was fate. Komo's Z-move would do damage to both opponents and give it an Omni Boost effect. So it had some usage in 2018 and with Mega Gengar and Tapu Bulu, a strong core. Yeah, it was really powerful, and it was another thing where, like, if it had a bad matchup, it would probably lose, but like a lot of people just weren't prepared for it, and it was just another thing you had to respect in team building. We don't really have anything like that because we don't have signature Z moves, so like, or signature Dynamax moves, I should say, outside of Gigantamax, which I guess is the closest comparison. However, because none of them provide Omni Boost effects, like, the Gigantamax forms are good, don't get me wrong. Lapras is really good at setting Aurora Veil. Charizard and Colossal are both really good. There's a lot of good Gigantamax Pokemon that are in the format right now. However, they play, like, Como and Eevee were Pokemon where, like, they would set up and win the game, and we don't have things like that necessarily, unless Machamp, like, super takes off. I don't think we really have things like that. Like, the effects that the Gigantamax Pokemon give are typically, I would say, a little slower, right? Like, they're not, like, instant win the games. It's like, oh, I set Vocalith. Now I have 4 turns with passive damage. Or, oh, I have Aurora Veil. Now I get to have, like, a lot of bulk, right? But it's not like, oh, I got my Gigantamax attack off, I won the game, right? Or, oh, my opponent was in bad position when I G-maxed. Like, I'd probably win the game right here, like, without having to do, like, the rest of the game is played out for me, you know? So, yeah. Not saying that Gigantamax can't win the game, but that it wasn't, like, it wasn't as, oh, they set up, now I lose, right? I think the last 2 things I want to talk about, the first is that, so with Z-moves, like, how do I describe this? With Z-moves, only certain Pokemon would use Z-moves because they needed a Z crystal to actually activate the Z-move. However, you wouldn't know that until after they use the Z-move. So, in a tournament match, if you played against a Kartana, you couldn't be sure if it was Focus Sash, or Assault Vest, or Fighting Z-move, or Grass Z-move until after you saw a couple moves out of it, and that made it, like, very hard to cover for it. Like other Pokemon as well. Tapu Koko could run Z-moves, or it could run different. It could run Life Orb, or Choice Specs was popular at some point. Tapu Fini could run a Z-move. There was a period where a Z-move Tapu Fini was used for some time, and so yeah, you basically just couldn't tell, like, what until after you saw something what it was gonna do, and that made it really hard to like play, in my opinion. Like, it was very difficult to play safely. Like, you could make inferences, but, like, a surprise Z-move could turn the game, and, yeah, like, because if you guess wrong in front of a Z-move user, and they hit you with a full-power Z-move, you might lose a Pokemon, and, yeah, that could be kind of dangerous. And so, you might be thinking, oh, well, Wolf, now any Pokemon can Dynamax. So, like, isn't that worse? Because now any Pokemon could do that, and, in my opinion, it's the reverse. Because any Pokemon can Dynamax, as a player, you're always aware of the possibilities that either of their 2 Pokemon could Dynamax in that position. And so it's like, you don't have to guess because you know the option. You know that your opponent has the option of Dynamax, and so it makes it like, it's not like, oh, if I guess wrong on whether they have the Dynamax crystal and they have it, then I'll lose. It's like, oh, I know they have the Dynamax, ability, so I have to cover for it. And you could say, oh, well, why couldn't you cover it with Z-move? It's because, going back to the power of Z-moves, is that, and going back to the fact that you don't have, like, a defensive option in front of Z-moves other than protecting. Like, if you protect in front of Cortana and it subs, or it Tailwinds, like, you might be in trouble. But, like, you can always use your Dynamax to cover an opponent's Dynamax if you're really in a position where you think that if they Dynamax and you get it wrong, you lose. So you could do that, for example. So it's actually having more option of Dynamax makes it easier, makes less, like, it's easier to cover. Whereas having less options in Z Crystals and not, like, the lack of information made it actually harder to cover. This is all my opinion, just to be clear. Like, maybe people disagree with me, but this has been my experience playing, all of these formats. I look very, like, washed. I just realized. Maybe it's the pink shirt. It's probably the backlight. What happens if I do this? That's even worse. Okay, well, that's fine. And the last thing I want to talk about is that Dynamax doesn't take an item slot. That might be a point in favor of Z-moves. However, I actually like that Dynamax can be applied to anything because it means that you can adjust your plans on the fly, which is something you couldn't do with Z-moves. Why did my hair didn't even fix itself? With Z-moves, like, you had 1 or 2 Pokemon on a team. If you were really insane, you'd have 3. You would have, let's say 2 Pokemon on average, 1 to 2 Pokemon on average with the Z Crystal on the team. And if that Pokemon isn't brought to the match, or if it gets KO'd before it can use its Z-move, or if it's not in a position to use its Z-move, you lose that damage for the whole game, right? And that could be, I wouldn't say it was detrimental or anything, but it is a disadvantage. In contrast to that, Dynamax can be used on any Pokemon. And so if something goes wrong, like if you get KO'd in a Pokemon that you weren't expecting, or if they have a wonky move or a tech, it gives you the ability to adjust, which is not something that you could do with ZMoves because you were locked into certain item slots. So I think the fact that any Pokemon can Dynamax makes it like, I think it rewards players who are able to adapt in the fly and who are able to form like fluid game plans rather than set game plans. And I like that a lot. I like when a format rewards that personally a lot. So I realized I probably spent most of this video bashing on ZMoves. That wasn't really my intention. I tried to include both like points for both Dynamax and for ZMoves, but those are all my points, and I don't really feel like rambling just for the sake of it. I feel like I've done given my regular baseline, I feel like this is relatively coherent, so I'm sure I'm going to get comments being like, you should just make a script or edit it or whatever, but I don't know. I think I'll just end the video here. Let me know if you want to see more content like this. I'm definitely trying to branch out a little bit, and now that I'm 200K, I'm going to, keep branching out, keep trying new things. So let me know if you like these kind of discussion videos, and yeah, I think that's all I have to say. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.